Hi, welcome back to my workshop. This is going to be some quick videos on zxspectrum next basic, and there are some advanced commands for moving sprites and doing sprite collisions. I've been writing like a demo program, and these are things that I've been learning, and I thought I would share a few of these commands with you. The system that we're using is zxspect. I'm using a program called HDFM GUI that allows me to drop files onto the next image. So we can see here these are the files that I've copied across. I'm using UDG to edit the actual sprites. I've just made some very simple ones for the purposes of these demo. So we have like a box which will be showing off the bounding boxes, and then some basic colors. And the first one I've just sectioned off so that I can show things rotate and mirror when they're moving. So these are already saved onto the next image card using HDFM GUI. So let's launch zxspect. So I'm just going to go into the folder with the project, and I'm going to load up a blank basic. So this is our blank file, there's nothing in it. The first thing I want to do is just tell it to automatically save what I'm doing. So any changes that we make will automatically be saved. The next thing is I want to send a command that tells the next to run at its maximum speed of 28 megahertz. So the 3 is 28, 2 is 14, 1 is 7, 0 is 3.75. Now I'm going to load in the sprite file. So it's load demo.spr, and we need to load it into a bank of memory. For the demo, I'm just going to use bank 13. And then we need to tell the sprite system where to find the sprites. So sprite bank 13. So they're loading the sprites into memory, storing them in bank 13, and then telling the sprite command to find them at sprite 13, at bank 13. Now we want to set the active layer. The next has layer 0, which is the basic spectrum ULA, layer 1, which is an advanced ULA, and layer 2, which is the next hardware stuff. So we do layer 2, 1. 1 means that it's on, because you can turn the layer off and do updates and turn it back on again. Does anybody else find that it automatically repeats keys in zxspect? Then let's just do a CLS. So if we run that, it will save itself and just clear the screen. The next command is to turn sprites on. So Sprite Print 1 will turn the sprites on. So now let's put a sprite on the screen. So we'll use the Sprite 1. We'll put it at position 50-50, and we'll use the first frame with the color, which is sprite number 3. And then 1 means to turn on. So the sprite ID, the position on the screen, the animation cell, and to turn it on or off. There are some other commands at the end, but we'll cover those later. So sprite 1, 50-50, 3, 1. If we run that now, so we have a sprite positioned at 50-50 on the screen. So let's say we wanted to move that sprite around the screen. The normal option would be to use like a for next loop and increment the position on the screen. That takes up programming cycles that we want to keep to get our character interaction nice and quick. So the other option is to use a command called Sprite Continue. if you look in the PDFs for the next, there's a manual that has all the extra commands. It's actually not that clear. It's got square brackets around the sections, and it was a bit confusing. So I looked at some of the demos and worked it out. This is the basic structure. So the first part is the sprite, which is based on the sprite ID that we've already positioned on the screen. The sections are separated by commas. So this first section is to position and move the X axis of the sprite. And it's kind of like a for next loop. So we've already put our sprite at position 50. So we start at 50. And I want to move it 100 pixels across the screen from the left to the right. So it's 50 to 150. So that, like I say, it's like a for next loop. And then we can tell it how many steps to move. 1 pixel, 2 pixel, 3 pixels every time it's updated. So we'll do step 1. It won't do anything until you tell it to run. So you have to put run, and then that will process the 50 to 150. You could put stop. So even though you put that information in, it won't actually move while the stop command is there. So I want to move it from the left to the right. So 50 to 150, 1 pixel at a time, run. Then we put a comma. This is our Y section. I don't want to move on the Y. So I just want to leave it at 50. And then we put stop, so it will not move on the 50. So that's the Y section. The next part is to cycle through frames of animation. I don't want to cycle at the moment, so I'm just going to leave it at 3. So that won't change the actual animation. The next section is a section of flags, which we'll cover in more detail later. But for the moment, I want it to say, when it gets to the end of the animation section, when it gets to the end of the X movement, so when it gets to 50, we can say disable, move in a different direction, move back on yourself and mirror the actual sprite. So let's do that. When it gets to 150, it moves back to 50. When it gets to 50, it moves back to 150. And our player character will do that. So the character's moving across the screen. So we put bin, because it's a binary value, 1, 0, 0, 0. And we'll look at some other options in a little bit. The last one is a delay. So even though we've got a step of how many pixels it moves every time, we can also say how many times it's updated when we update all of the sprites. So if you put 0, there's no delay. It will always move every time the screen is updated. So that's our Sprite Continue. If we run that, it doesn't do anything. And the reason it doesn't do anything is because we need to tell Basic when to move the sprites. And that command is Sprite Move. And there's 2 ways to use this. The first one is to force updates when the program tells it to. So if we do that first, and then our program loop is basically Sprite Move, go to Sprite Move. So there's no other program running at the time. We've set everything up beforehand. And we can see there that it's moving, but it's moving insanely fast because it's not linked to anything. So if we want to link it to the screen refresh, to an interrupt, we add int on the end. So that will now wait for an interrupt before it moves the Sprite Continue commands. We can see there that it's now moving nice and smooth. And it's moving left to right within our designated range. I think it's because the background is white. Yeah, so blue background. So you can see there that the sprite, when it gets to the end of the 150, it flips. And when it gets back to 50, it flips. So if you've got the animation of your character moving, walking, you only need to do the animation facing one way, and the next has a flip flag so that you can do the mirrors. And you can do it up, down, left or right. You can rotate them as well. So that's a simple way to get a character to move around the screen with no programming whatsoever. Let's just add a second one, which will move up and down. So 75, sprite 2, 150, 50, 3, 1. So it's going to start at the 150 pixels across, 50 pixels down. I'm still using frame animation 3, and I've turned it on. So let's add line 85, sprite, continue, sprite number 2, 150, stop, 50 to 150, step 2. So we're going to move 2 pixels every time. Run. Animation 3 to 3, bin 1000, so that it mirrors up and down, 0. So if we run this now, we should see 2 sprites moving on the screen. So you can see that the sprite moving left or right is flipping, but the sprite moving up or down isn't flipping because we need to change the flag for the Y invert rather than the X invert. So looking at the manual, bit 3 is flip the X, but bit 2 is flip the Y. So it should be 0100. And then you can see that it's flipping on the Y when it's moving up and down, and it's flipping on the X when it's moving left to right. And the one moving up and down is moving 2 pixels, and the one moving left or right is moving 1 pixel. So we'll add a third, which is moving on X and the Y. So 76, sprite 3, 100, 100, 3, 1. 86, sprite, continue 3, 50 to 150, step 1, run, 50 to 150, step 1, run, 3 to 3, and then we want to flip X and Y. So bin 1100, 0. So that's going to move in a box 50, 50, 150, 150, and it should bounce around starting from the middle. And you can see that the sprite is flipping, but because we started in the very middle, it's just going in the corners. So let's just offset that first part to 80. So now our middle sprite is bouncing around, much like the old DVD logo. And our sprite is automatically changing the direction that it's looking to match whatever direction that it's going. So that's the basic functions of Sprite Continue. Next, let's just look at some of the other simple commands that we can do on the binary, on the bin section. So our first sprite is moving left to right, and it's mirroring what it moves. If we change that to 1, 1, what it will do is it will stop completely and disable the sprite when it gets to the end of the line. So it moves across and it's disappeared. It's got to the end of the section, it's instantly turned itself off. Goes across, disappears. So that would be good for firing missiles. You want it to move to a certain place, and then just when it gets past that boundary, turns itself off. So if it's just 0, it reflects, but it doesn't flip the sprite. So it's moving backwards and forwards, but there's no sprite flipping. If it's 1, it says stop this direction, start a new one. I think you need to have more than one direction for that one. Let's try 1-0. So 1-0 gets to the end of the line, stops moving, but does not disable anything. So let's do the one that's moving around the screen. Let's try on that one. So we'll change that one to 0. So we should just have one sprite on the screen now. Let's just get rid of the sprites that were existing on the screen. So we should only have one sprite on the screen now. And this is moving 0, 0, which is to reflect this direction. So stop this direction, start other direction. Let's try that. So now, rather than reflecting, it's moving around the edges of the bounding box. So that's 01, which will follow around a bounding box. One should just get to the edge of the box and stop moving. There we go. And then 1-1 was to stop moving and turn itself off when it gets to the edge of the bounding box. And there we go. So that's the first 2 bits. So with the 3rd bit set, it flips at the top and the bottom. So when it gets to the bottom, it flips. When it gets to the top, with the 4th bit set, it inverts. It mirrors on the left and the right. And then with both of them set, it mirrors on all directions. If we set the first bit to 1, it should move around the edge of the screen and change the sprite to look in the direction that it's moving. So let's look at the next bit. It says bit 4, behavior of the animation cycle. If it's a 0, cycle upwards. If it's a 1, then it moves between the upper and lower limits. So at the moment it would be 0, so it will just go between frames 1 to 9. Let's slow the animation down by putting a delay. So it's just moving from sprite 1 up to sprite 9. If we change that, it should go up and then back. So that's bit 4, which changes the order of the animation frames. The next bit 5, when it gets to the end of the pattern, it disables. So if we set that to 1, it should move through those 9 frames of animation and then turn itself off. There we go. Put it back to 0. And it will continue through the animation frames. So that was bit 5. The next bit 6, if set update pattern even when the sprite is stationary. So at the moment it would be 0. Let's stop the sprite from moving. So let's say you had a coin on your screen and you wanted the coin to rotate but not move anywhere on the screen. So we would set it to a fixed position, but at the moment the bit 6 is set to 0, so it's not moving, therefore it's not animating. So now if we set that bit to a 1, it's not moving, but it's animating. So that's a static animated sprite in hardware. And then we have one more bit. If set, the X mirror, Y mirror, and orientation flags are set according to the travel. And this overrides bit 2 and 3. So if we set the first bit, and don't forget to missed the P. Change that back to 3. And take off the delay. So I guess we'd have to change the sprite slightly because it's not doing the same as the other one. So that one maybe needs a little bit more looking into. But we've been through all of the bits that we can use on the Sprite Continue to change how it moves around the screen and how the animation can be altered. So I think that is all that we will do for Sprite Continue. I hope that that is okay and it makes sense. I will put this code in the description. Let's just put everything back on. Let's just say 3, 2, 9, 1. Oops. So we're going to have Sprite 1 moving left to right, animated through the colors. Sprite 2 moving up and down, moving through the bounding boxes, and then Sprite 3 bouncing around the middle of the screen. And like I say, that is independent of any of our program code. So I hope that's okay. I hope I haven't run that through too quickly, but look at the program that I'll put in the description and see how you get on. Thanks for watching, and I'll be working on another one very soon.